The letter arrived on a crisp autumn morning, exactly 40 days after Henry had walked out of our life. No return address, no postmark, just my name written in his mother's elegant cursive, handwriting I hadn't seen in 15 years, not since. She passed away. My hands trembled as I stood in the doorway, the cool October air swirling around my ankles. How could Margaret send me anything from beyond the grave? And why now? When the empty space in our bed had finally stopped feeling like a physical wound? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I almost didn't open it. After 40 years of marriage, Henry had left with barely a goodbye, just a hastily packed suitcase and mumbled words about needing space and time to think. 4 decades together, 3 children raised, 7 grandchildren adored, and countless moments both beautiful and painful shared, all apparently less valuable to him than whatever midlife revelation had struck at age 67. The letter felt like another blow I wasn't ready to absorb, but curiosity has always been my weakness. Standing in our kitchen, no, my kitchen now, I carefully broke the seal on the yellowed envelope. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, the fancy kind Margaret had always saved for important correspondence, with delicate flowers embossed along the border. The date at the top made my breath catch, June 12, 1982, our wedding day. My dearest Catherine, it began. If you're reading this, it means Henry has finally made the same mistake his father made. The room seemed to tilt. I had to sit down, the wooden chair cold beneath me. Margaret had written this letter 40 years ago and somehow anticipated this moment, this heartbreak. She had known her son would leave me someday. What mother predicts such a thing about her own child on his wedding day? And if she knew, why hadn't she warned me? I've always been a practical woman. That's what drew Henry to me in the first place, or so he said during our early courtship. You don't play games, Kathy, he'd tell me, brushing my auburn hair back from my face with such tenderness. You see the world as it is, not how you wish it could be. In those early days, his words felt like poetry, but practicality didn't prepare me for the void Henry left behind. It didn't help me explain to our confused children why their father had suddenly decided that our life together wasn't enough. It didn't answer the phone calls from friends who didn't know what to say, but felt they should say something. And it certainly didn't fill the silence of my home in the evenings. When the shadows grew long, Margaret's letter sat open on the kitchen table while I made tea with mechanical movements. The routine was comforting. Kettle, cup, tea bag, wait. I'd made tea this way every afternoon for 40 years, first just for myself while Henry was at work at the architecture firm, then for both of us after he retired 3 years ago, now just for me again. 1 cup, not 2, another adjustment among many. I returned to the letter, forcing myself to read beyond that first shocking sentence. My dearest Catherine, if you're reading this, it means Henry has finally made the same mistake his father made. He has walked away from the person who loves him most in this world, just when he needs that love the most. First, I want you to know this isn't your fault. Nothing you did or didn't do caused this. The Harrington men carry a peculiar weakness in their hearts, not a lack of love, but a fear of it when it grows too deep, too necessary. I watched my William do this to me in our 32nd year together. He left without warning, convinced he needed to find himself again, as if his self was something he had misplaced rather than something he had carefully built with me, brick by brick through decades of shared life. He returned 6 months later, humbled and desperately sorry, having discovered that what he thought was a prison was actually his foundation. I forgave him, though it took years to trust him again. And now I fear my son will follow this same path. This inherited restlessness that seems to bloom in Harrington men as they face their own mortality. I pray I'm wrong. I pray you never read these words. But if you do, I want you to know 3 things. First, Henry will return. The world outside what you've built together will quickly lose its shine. Second, whether you take him back is entirely your choice. Your dignity matters more than his comfort. Third, the key to the blue safe deposit box at First National Bank is taped to the back of this letter. What's inside belongs to you now, regardless of what happens next. With love and hope for a future where my fears prove unfounded, Margaret. I turned the letter over with shaking hands. Sure enough, taped. To the back was a small key, its brass surface tarnished with age. Margaret had planned for this moment 4 decades ago, had carried the weight of this knowledge through every holiday dinner, every grandchild's birth, every anniversary celebration. How had she smiled through it all, knowing this pain waited in my future? The next morning I drove to First National Bank, Margaret's letter carefully folded in my purse. I hadn't slept well, my dreams filled with images of Henry and his father William, a man I'd only met twice before his death, walking away down identical roads, their silhouettes growing smaller against an empty horizon. The bank manager, a young woman with kind eyes who introduced herself as Denise, led me to the safe deposit room. I wondered what she thought of me, a woman in her 60s, clearly having been crying recently, hands clutching a 40-year-old letter like a lifeline. "Take all the time you need, Mrs. Harrington," she said, leaving me alone with the blue metal box that Margaret had arranged so long ago. Mrs. Harrington. The name felt like a borrowed coat now, still familiar, but no longer quite fitting. Henry had called me Mrs. H as a term of endearment throughout our marriage. "What does Mrs. H think about this color for the living room?" he'd ask, holding up paint samples. "Mrs. H makes the best apple pie in the county," he'd boast to friends. Now the name was just a legal designation, a remnant of something broken. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The key turned smoothly in the lock despite its age. Inside the box were several neatly organized items: a thick manila envelope, a small velvet jewelry box, and a USB drive that looked relatively new, certainly not from 1982. Margaret must have updated the contents of this box over the years, continuing to prepare for the day her son would leave me. I opened the manila envelope first. Inside were financial documents, copies of statements from an account I'd never known about, in both Margaret's and my name. The most recent statement showed a balance that made me gasp: $387,150. 91. Margaret had been saving for me, building a safety net in secret. The account had been opened the day after our wedding, with an initial deposit of $5,000. Every month since then, like clockwork, she had added to it. The jewelry box contained her grandmother's emerald ring, the one Henry's sister Alice had always expected to inherit. Margaret had shown it to me once, explaining its history back to the old country, how it had traveled from Ireland during the potato famine, carried by a desperate young widow with 3 small children who would eventually establish the family in Boston. "True treasures survive hard journeys," Margaret had said, closing the box again. I'd assumed the ring had been buried with her or given to Alice. Instead, it had been waiting here, another piece of preparation for this day. The USB drive was the most puzzling item. I slipped it into my purse, deciding to examine it at home, where I could process whatever it contained in private. As I drove home, my mind raced with questions. Had Henry known about any of this? Had William's departure from Margaret been a family secret kept from me? And why had Margaret been so certain history would repeat itself that she'd made these elaborate arrangements? My house looked different somehow as I pulled into the driveway. Smaller, maybe, or just lonelier. The Japanese maple Henry had planted for our 10th anniversary blazed red against the blue October sky. He'd loved that tree, faithfully, mulching around it every spring, pruning it with careful precision. "This will outlast us both," he'd said proudly last year. He couldn't have known then how soon he'd be gone, how quickly us would dissolve into separate lives. Inside, I made another cup of tea, the second of the day, a small indulgence, and retrieved my laptop from the study. The USB drive felt unnaturally heavy in my hand as I inserted it into the port. There was only one file on it, a video labeled "For Catherine After." Margaret's face filled my screen, her silver hair neatly styled, pearl earrings catching the light. She looked exactly as she had in the months before her death, the cancer not yet visible in her features, her eyes still bright with life. This must have been recorded shortly before she passed away. "Catherine, my dear," she began, her voice so achingly familiar that tears immediately blurred my vision. "If you're watching this, then I was right to worry, and I'm so very sorry for the pain you're experiencing. By now you've found the account and the ring. Good. Those are practical matters, and we both know how important it is to address practicalities first." She smiled softly, and I could almost smell her signature lavender perfume, could almost feel the gentle pressure of her hand on mine. "But what you really need right now isn't money or heirlooms. It's understanding. William left me when Henry was in college. No one knew except Henry's father and I. We kept it from the children to protect them. And, if I'm honest, to protect our pride. William was gone for 6 months and 3 days. When he returned, he was both the same man I had always loved and someone entirely new, humbled in a way that changed how he moved through the world." She leaned closer to the camera, her expression earnest. "The Harrington men suffer from a particular delusion at a certain age. They convince themselves that the constancy of love is actually a constraint, that the life they've chosen is preventing them from becoming who they're meant to be. It's a family pattern stretching back generations. My father-in-law did it to my mother-in-law. William did it to me. And I've watched Henry closely over the years, looking for signs that he inherited this restless gene." She sighed, lines of worry etching deeper around her mouth. "I saw it begin about 5 years ago, the distant look at family gatherings, the sudden interest in traveling alone, the questions about the road not taken. I hoped I was wrong. I prayed I was seeing ghosts where there were none. But a mother knows her son, and I recognized the shadows gathering in Henry's eyes." I paused the video, needing a moment to absorb this revelation. 5 years ago? Henry had been planning his departure for 5 years? We'd celebrated our 35th anniversary then with a cruise to Alaska. He'd seemed happy, taking hundreds of photos, of glaciers and whales, holding my hand on deck as we watched the northern lights shimmer across the midnight sky. Had that all been performance? Had he already been mentally packing his bags while telling me he loved me? With a deep breath, I pressed play again. "What you need to know, Catherine, is that this journey Henry is on isn't really about you, or even about your marriage. It's about his fear of mortality, his terror of reaching the end of his life without having answered some imagined calling. It's a profound selfishness disguised as spiritual necessity." Margaret's expression softened, compassion replacing criticism. "But it's also temporary. The Harrington men always return, Catherine. The question you need to ask yourself is whether you want him back when he does. William and I had another 20 good years together after his return, but something between us was permanently altered. There was a scar tissue around my heart that never quite dissolved." She picked up a framed photo from beside her, angling it toward the camera. I recognized it as a picture of Henry and me on our wedding day. Young, radiant, absolutely certain of our shared future. "I've watched you love my son with a steadiness he doesn't deserve. I've watched you build a life, of beauty and substance. Whatever you decide when Henry realizes his mistake, know that you have my blessing and my admiration. The account will give you freedom to choose based on your heart, not financial necessity. The ring is your connection to a lineage of women who survived difficult men and still found joy. She set the photo down, her hands visibly trembling now. From emotion or illness, I couldn't tell. There's a final item I've arranged for you, though it's not in the safe deposit box. I've left instructions with my lawyer, Richard Abernathy. 100 days after Henry leaves, if he leaves, Richard will deliver something to him. A letter I've written to my son that I hope will wake him from this inherited madness sooner rather than later. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. I love you, Catherine. You have been the daughter I never had by birth but was blessed to gain through marriage. Whatever happens next, remember that your worth isn't tied to Henry's ability to recognize it. The account is yours regardless. The ring is yours regardless. Your dignity is yours to protect, not to surrender. The video ended there, freezing on Margaret's face. Loving, worried, somehow both present and gone forever. I sat in stunned silence, the empty teacup cold between my palms. 100 days after Henry left. If my count was correct, that would be tomorrow. The realization sent a jolt through me. Tomorrow, Henry would receive whatever message Margaret had left for him. Tomorrow, something would change. Though whether it would matter to me remained to be seen. For 40 days, I had moved through grief like walking underwater. Everything slower, harder, the surface of normal life visible but unreachable. I'd told our children that their father and I were taking some time apart, a phrase that tasted like ash in my mouth. The truth was simpler and more brutal. Henry had walked out on a Tuesday morning after breakfast, claiming he needed to find himself before it was too late. Our oldest, Michael, had wanted to confront him immediately. He can't just throw away 40 years like it's nothing, he'd raged over the phone from Seattle. What kind of example is he setting for his grandchildren? Our daughters had reacted differently. Jennifer with practical offers of help and endless casseroles delivered to my door. Amanda with a deep sadness that mirrored my own, calling daily just to sit in sympathetic silence when words failed us. Both. I hadn't told any of them about the letter yet, or the safe deposit box, or the video. These revelations felt too raw, too private to share, even with my children. Especially the most shocking part, that Margaret had somehow predicted. This had seen it coming when I had been blindly trusting in our shared future. That night I barely slept. My mind constructed scenario after scenario of what might happen tomorrow. Would Henry receive Margaret's letter and come rushing back, full of remorse? Would he read it and ignore it, too far gone in his journey of self-discovery to be reached even by his mother's posthumous plea? Would it change anything for me if he did return? Morning arrived with cruel brightness, sunlight streaming through the windows I'd forgotten to close. I made coffee, folded laundry, watered the plants, all the mundane tasks that had become my anchors in this new, unwanted reality. The emerald ring sat on my finger, its weight unfamiliar, but somehow right. I'd decided to wear it, not as a connection to Henry, but as a link to Margaret and her quiet strength. The knock came at 11:17 a.m. 3 sharp raps that sent my heart racing. I knew before opening the door that it would be Henry. He looked older somehow, though it had only been 40 days. There were new lines around his eyes, and his silver hair seemed duller. He held a cream-colored envelope in one hand, Margaret's handwriting visible on the front. "Kathy," he said, his voice catching, "can I come in? Please?" I stepped aside wordlessly, allowing him into the house he had abandoned. He moved awkwardly, like a visitor afraid of disturbing something fragile, and stopped in the middle of the living room, seemingly unsure whether to sit. "You've changed things," he said, noticing the rearranged furniture, the new throw pillows, the absence of his reading chair by the window. "Yes," I replied simply, not offering explanations. The chair had gone to Goodwill the week after he left, along with his favorite mug, his slippers, and every photograph that featured just him alone. Our family pictures remained, but I'd removed all evidence of Henry as an individual from the home. It had been both therapeutic and painful, like excising a tumor while still conscious. "My mother's lawyer delivered this to me this morning," he said, holding up the envelope. "He said I was to read it in private and then bring it to you. That you would understand why." "And did you read it?" "Yes." His voice cracked again, and I noticed the redness around his eyes. Henry had been crying, something I'd seen perhaps 5 times in our 40 years together. She knew, Kathy. Somehow, she knew I would do this. She called it the Harrington curse, this restlessness, this stupidity. He looked down at the envelope. "Did you know that my father left her once, for 6 months?" "I know now," I said quietly. "She left me a letter too, and other things." His eyes caught the emerald on my finger, widening in recognition. "Grandma Sullivan's ring. She always said Alice would get that." She changed her mind, apparently. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. Once I would have rushed to fill it, to ease his discomfort. Now I let it grow, feeling a strange new power in my stillness. "The letter," he finally said, extending it toward me. "She wanted you to read it too." I took it from him, our fingers carefully avoiding contact. The paper inside was the same flowered stationery as my letter had been, though this one was dated just weeks before Margaret's death. "My dear son," it began, "by the time you read this, you will have made the worst mistake of your life. You will have left Catherine, convinced that there is something more authentic waiting for you beyond the life you've built together. You will be wrong." I glanced up at Henry, whose face had flushed with shame. He gestured for me to continue reading. "I watched your father make this same mistake. The Harrington men seem cursed with this particular blindness, mistaking the depth of love for a trap, rather than the foundation it truly is. Your great-grandfather left your great-grandmother for nearly a year before returning, humbled and never the same. Your father left me for 6 months that you never knew about, convinced he needed space to become who he was meant to be. And now you have done this to Catherine, the woman who has loved you with more patience and grace than you deserve. I know this because I've seen the signs gathering in you over these past years. The distant look, the restless questions, the pulling away. I know because you are your father's son, and I have studied this pattern for decades. Here is what your father discovered in his time away, what I suspect you will discover too. The world outside the home you've built is cold and, ultimately, meaningless without someone to share it with. The freedom you think you're seeking is actually a formless void. The self you hope to find already exists within the love you've carelessly discarded. You will return, Henry. The only question is whether Catherine will still be waiting and whether she should be. I have made arrangements to ensure she has choices. Financial independence if she needs it, the family emerald as a reminder of her place in our lineage regardless of your foolishness, and my blessing if she chooses to deny you the easy forgiveness you will undoubtedly seek. If you're reading this, it means 100 days have passed since you left. Enough time for the initial excitement of your freedom to fade, for loneliness to settle into your bones, for regret to begin its slow, insistent gnawing. Go to her now. Not with grand gestures or promises, but with humility and the recognition that whatever comes next is entirely her choice. I have loved you imperfectly but completely, Henry. I hope she finds it in her heart to do the same, though you've given her every reason not to. But remember this. Love can be a choice even after trust is broken, but dignity once surrendered is nearly impossible to reclaim. Approach her with the respect her forgiveness would deserve, not the entitlement your remorse might demand. With enduring hope for your awakening, your mother. I carefully refolded the letter, my eyes stinging with fresh tears. Not for Henry, or even for myself, but for Margaret. How long had she carried this knowledge? How painful to watch your son heading toward a cliff and be unable to stop his fall. She was right, Henry said softly. About all of it. The excitement did fade, the freedom did feel empty, and now I'm... His voice trailed off, hands spreading in a helpless gesture. Now you're what, Henry? I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. Ashamed, lost, sorry beyond words. He took a hesitant step toward me. Kathy, I made a terrible mistake. These past weeks have been... I held up my hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Where have you been staying? The question seemed to surprise him. At the Riverview Motel at first. Then I rented a small apartment near the college. It's furnished. Temporary. Nothing feels like home, I finished for him. He nodded, relief washing over his face at my understanding. But understanding wasn't forgiveness, and I wasn't ready to offer that yet. Wasn't sure if I ever would be. You should know, I said carefully, that your mother left me more than letters and this ring. She left me financial independence. She left me choices. I turned the emerald on my finger, watching light dance through its depths. She wanted to make sure I could decide based on my heart, not necessity. Henry's face registered confusion, then understanding, then something like fear. He nodded slowly, acknowledging this shift in power between us. For decades, I'd been the financially vulnerable one. The wife who had stepped back from her teaching career to raise our children, whose retirement now depended on his pension. Margaret had silently corrected that imbalance, giving me what every person deserves when making decisions about love, the freedom to choose without desperation. I don't know what to say, Henry admitted, sinking down onto the edge of the sofa, without invitation. I never imagined Mom would. He trailed off, staring at the emerald on my finger. Prepare for your betrayal? I supplied. Neither did I. But she saw what I couldn't, or wouldn't, see. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed noon, its familiar Westminster melody striking me differently now. Henry had inherited that clock from his parents, had lovingly maintained its mechanism for decades. Time had continued its steady march through our home while my marriage crumbled beneath its surface. I'd like to come home, Kathy, Henry said quietly. I know I don't deserve it. I know I've hurt you in ways that might be unforgivable. But these 40 days have shown me what a fool I've been. I studied his face. The face I had looked at across breakfast tables and dinner conversations for 40 years. The face that had gazed down at our newborn children with wonder. The face that had aged alongside mine through triumph and hardship. I had memorized every line, every expression. But now I found myself searching for something new. Genuine remorse, not just regret over consequences. It's been 41 days, I corrected him. And no, you can't come home. Not today. Maybe not ever. He flinched as if I'd struck him. This wasn't the reception he'd expected, despite his mother's warning. In our decades together, I'd always been the peacemaker, the one who bent first after arguments, the one who prioritized harmony over justice. The Catherine sitting across from him now was unfamiliar, steady, resolute, unwilling to sacrifice her dignity for his comfort. I understand, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Can we at least talk? About what happened? About why I left without warning after 40 years? Walked away from our vows, our family, our entire life together? My voice remained controlled, but I felt heat rising in my cheeks. I'm curious, Henry. What could possibly explain that? He looked down at his hands, strong hands that had built our deck, rocked our babies, held mine through my father's funeral. I felt like I was disappearing, he said slowly, like I'd become nothing more than a role, husband, father, grandfather, without any true self underneath. I woke up one morning and couldn't remember the last time I'd made a choice that wasn't somehow shaped by our life together. The irony struck me with such force that I laughed, a short, sharp sound without humor. And your solution was to erase 40 years rather than have a conversation, to demolish rather than renovate? I wasn't thinking clearly, he admitted. It was like a fever took hold of me. All I could see was this narrowing path ahead, retirement, aging, eventual death, all without ever knowing if I could have been someone different, someone more authentic. I stood and walked to the window, needing physical distance from his justifications. Outside, Mrs. Abernathy from next door was walking her corgi, pausing to let the dog sniff at our mailbox. She'd brought me a lasagna when word spread about Henry's departure, her eyes full of the special pity reserved for abandoned wives. "Such a shame at your age," she'd said, as if younger women somehow deserved abandonment more. "Authentic," I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. "Tell me, Henry, what's authentic about breaking promises? What's authentic about leaving your wife to explain your absence to your grandchildren? What's authentic about walking away from responsibilities you willingly accepted?" He had no answer, just a helpless gesture with those once beloved hands. "Your mother's letter mentioned a Harrington curse," I continued. "This restlessness, this delusion that freedom exists in absence rather than within commitment. She said your father did the same thing to her." Henry looked up sharply. "You never told me that Dad left Mom." "I didn't know until yesterday," I replied. "They kept it from everyone, including you. Just as we've been telling our children, we're taking some time apart, rather than admitting you walked out without warning." Silence filled the room again, heavier this time. Henry's shoulders slumped as the weight of family patterns settled upon them. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "Those words are inadequate, but they're true. I've been staying in a sterile apartment, eating meals alone, sleeping badly, and thinking constantly about what I threw away. Every morning I wake up reaching for you before I remember. Part of me, the part that had loved this man for more than 4 decades, ached to comfort him. But another part, a stronger part that had been awakening since I'd found Margaret's letter, held firm. Remembering is not the same as understanding, Henry, and understanding is not the same as changing." I turned back to face him. "I need time. Real time. Not just days marked off on a calendar. I need to figure out who Catherine Harrington is, when she's not defined by being your wife." He nodded slowly, acceptance gradually replacing the hope in his eyes. "I can give you time," he said. "I can give you whatever you need. I don't want to lose you forever, Kathy. You should have considered that possibility before you left." The harshness of my response surprised us both. In 40 years, I had rarely spoken to him with such directness. I had cushioned hard truths, softened blows, created emotional safety even when it cost me my own voice. No more. "You're right," he acknowledged. "I've been selfish in ways I'm only beginning to recognize." He stood, clearly understanding that this conversation had reached its natural conclusion. "May I call you? Or would you prefer I wait for you to contact me?" The question hung between us, representing more than just communication preferences. It was about control. Who would determine the pace and direction of whatever came next? "I'll contact you when I'm ready," I said. "Until then, please respect my space." He nodded again, moving toward the door with reluctant steps. At the threshold, he turned back. "The lawyer. Richard. He mentioned that Mom left something else for you. Something about an airplane ticket?" I hadn't heard this part. "What? Airplane ticket?" He wasn't specific. He just said to remind you that there was one final gift that would be explained in another letter, scheduled for delivery in 60 more days. Henry's expression was puzzled. "Do you know what that means?" No, I admitted, but your mother has proven remarkably prescient so far. After Henry left, I sat alone in the quiet house, turning the emerald ring on my finger. 100. Days after Henry's departure, Margaret had arranged for him to receive her letter. And apparently, 160 days after, just over 5 months from when he walked out, there would be something else. Another piece of Margaret's posthumous plan unfolding. The thought was both comforting and unsettling. Margaret had loved me, had clearly wanted to protect me. But there was something almost manipulative about these orchestrated revelations, these carefully timed interventions from beyond the grave. Had she not trusted me to find my own way through this crisis? Or had she simply known her son well enough to understand exactly what kind of support I would need, and when? That evening, I called my youngest daughter, Amanda. Unlike her siblings, Amanda had inherited Henry's thoughtful reticence rather than my more expressive nature. She listened quietly as I explained about Margaret's letter, the safe deposit box, and Henry's visit. So Grandma Margaret knew Dad would leave someday? She asked when I finished. I don't even know what that is. Heartbreaking? Creepy? Both, I acknowledged. I keep thinking about how she must have felt, watching us all those years, seeing signs I was blind to. Are you going to take him back? Amanda's question was direct, without judgment. I honestly don't know, I admitted. Right now, I'm still trying to understand who I am in this new reality, who Catherine is without Henry. There was a pause, and I could almost see Amanda's thoughtful expression, so like her father's. Mom, she said carefully, maybe the better question is who you want to be, not who you are without him. Her words struck me with unexpected force. Who did I want to be? For decades, I had defined myself primarily through relationships: wife, mother, grandmother. Even my community involvement had been extensions of these roles: PTA president, church volunteer, organizer of family reunions. Henry's abandonment had left me untethered, but it had also perhaps created space for something new. That's an excellent question, I said softly. One I need to spend some time with. After we hung up, I went to my closet and pulled out a small wooden box I'd kept hidden since Margaret's funeral. Inside were mementos from our relationship, birthday cards she'd given me, a silk scarf she'd brought back from her trip to Italy, a recipe for her famous cranberry relish written in her elegant script. At the bottom was a photograph taken on a women's weekend we'd shared at the coast 15 years ago. Just Margaret and me walking along the beach at sunset, our heads tilted toward each other in laughter. Henry had been annoyed about that trip, claiming he didn't understand why his mother and wife needed special time without the rest of the family. Looking at the photo now, I saw something I'd missed before: the conspiratorial closeness between us, the shared understanding that transcended our connection through Henry. Margaret hadn't just been my mother-in-law, she'd been my friend, my ally, perhaps even my protector in ways I was only now beginning to comprehend. The following weeks unfolded with a strange new rhythm. I began reclaiming spaces and routines that had previously been shaped around Henry's preferences. I painted the guest room a deep teal color he had always vetoed as too dark. I subscribed to the symphony series I'd longed to attend but had skipped because Henry found classical music boring. I adopted a cat from the local shelter, a dignified orange tabby I named Margaret, despite Henry's allergies that had prevented us from having pets. My children noticed these changes with varying reactions. Michael, ever protective, asked bluntly if I was erasing Dad from the family. Jennifer worried that these changes might make reconciliation harder if that's what I eventually wanted. But Amanda, my quietest child, simply said, "It's good to see you choosing, Mom." Henry maintained a respectful distance, though I occasionally heard updates about him through our shared circle of friends. He'd joined a men's group at the community center. He was seeing a therapist. He'd lost weight. These tidbits came to me like news from a foreign country I'd once lived in, but could now barely remember. 60 days after Henry's visit, 101 days since he'd left, Richard Abernathy's secretary called to schedule an appointment. "Miss Harrington," she said, the title strange in my ears after 40 years as Mrs. "It's still Mrs." I corrected automatically, then paused, reconsidering. "Actually, Catherine is fine." The meeting was set for the following afternoon. I dressed with unusual care, selecting a deep purple blouse that Margaret had always complimented, saying it brought out the green flecks in my hazel eyes. The emerald ring had become a daily companion, its weight on my finger a reminder of the strength of women who had navigated difficult passages before me. Richard Abernathy's office was exactly as I remembered from settling Margaret's estate, elegant but understated, with leather-bound books lining the walls and a desk too large for the aging attorney's diminutive frame. He greeted me with formal warmth, gesturing to a chair before retrieving a sealed envelope from his desk drawer. "Margaret was very specific about the timing of this delivery," he explained, his voice carrying the slight tremor of advancing age. "She said it was important that you have certain experiences before receiving this final communication." "What kind of experiences?" I asked, curious about Margaret's reasoning. Richard smiled slightly. "She said you needed time to rediscover yourself before considering this particular option." Her words, not mine. He handed me the envelope, the same flowered stationery as the previous letters. Inside was a brief note and an airline voucher for any destination, valid for 1 year. "My dearest Catherine," the note read, "by now you've had some time to absorb the shock of Henry's departure, and if my predictions are correct, his subsequent attempt to return. You've discovered the financial freedom I arranged for you and have hopefully begun to reconnect with parts of yourself that may have been set aside during your marriage. This voucher represents the final piece of my plan for you, not an ending, but a beginning. Go somewhere you've always wanted to visit. Go alone. Not as Henry's wife or your children's mother, but as Catherine, the bright, curious woman I first met all those years ago. Henry will keep for a while longer, whether you eventually choose to rebuild with him or to release him permanently, but this journey is for you alone. I didn't get this chance after William returned. I allowed myself to be reabsorbed into our marriage without ever discovering who I might have been on my own. Don't make my mistake. With all my love and complete faith in whatever you choose, Margaret." I stared at the voucher in my hand, emotions swirling. The closest I'd come to traveling alone had been that weekend at the coast with Margaret. Every other trip had been family vacations, anniversaries with Henry, visits to children in distant cities. The thought of selecting a destination based solely on my own desires was both thrilling and terrifying. "Did Margaret discuss this part of her plan with you?" I asked Richard. "Only in general terms," he replied. "She believed strongly in women's financial independence, a belief that intensified after her experience with William's temporary departure. And she often spoke about the importance of self-knowledge before making major life decisions." "She was a remarkable woman," I said softly. "Indeed she was." Richard's professional demeanor softened slightly. "If I may speak personally for a moment, Mrs. Harrington." "Catherine," I corrected gently. "Catherine," he acknowledged with a nod. "I've practiced family law for over 50 years. I've seen countless marriages end, some that should have continued, others that should have concluded far sooner. What's unusual about your situation is the opportunity it presents, not just for potential reconciliation, but for genuine transformation, regardless of the ultimate outcome." His words echoed in my mind as I drove home. Transformation. Not just weathering a crisis, but being fundamentally changed by it. Not just surviving abandonment, but potentially thriving because of the space it had created. At home, I spread out maps and travel guides borrowed from the library. Where would I go if the choice were entirely mine? What place had called to me over the years? A call I'd suppressed or ignored or compromised away. As I flipped through glossy photos of distant landscapes, a memory surfaced. A conversation with Margaret during that weekend at the coast. We'd been walking along the shore, collecting sand dollars and talking about roads not taken. "If you could have done anything different with your life, what would it be?" I'd asked her. She'd been quiet for a moment, waves lapping at our bare feet. "I would have studied archaeology," she finally said. "I've always been fascinated by lost civilizations, by the stories buried beneath our feet." "Why didn't you?" I'd asked, surprised by this revelation from a woman I thought I knew well. "Life happens," she'd replied with a small shrug. William's career took precedence. Then children came. It's not a regret exactly, just a path I glimpsed but never walked. Later that same day, I'd confessed my own unrealized dream, to see the northern lights from a glass igloo in Finland, to lie beneath that mystical sky and feel both infinitesimal and infinite simultaneously. "Then you must go someday," Margaret had said firmly. "Promise me, Catherine. Some dreams shouldn't be deferred indefinitely." I'd laughed it off then, listing practical obstacles. Cost, Henry's dislike of cold weather, the difficulty of such a long journey. Margaret hadn't argued, but there had been something in her expression. A quiet disappointment, perhaps, or a recognition of a pattern she knew too well. Now, sitting among travel brochures with Margaret's voucher in my hand, that conversation returned with perfect clarity. This had been her plan all along, not just to protect me financially if Henry left, but to create an opportunity for me, to reclaim dreams I'd set aside. That evening, I searched online for glass igloos in Finland and found myself booking a trip for the peak of the Northern Lights season, 3 months away. The rate was breathtaking, but Margaret's account would easily cover it. As I completed the reservation for one person, I felt a curious lightness, not joy exactly, but something adjacent to it. Anticipation, possibility, agency. The next morning, I called Henry for the first time since his visit. He answered on the first ring, his voice cautiously hopeful. "Kathy? Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," I assured him. "I wanted to let you know that I'm taking a trip in 3 months. I'll be gone for 2 weeks." "A trip?" He sounded confused, as if the concept of me traveling without him was incomprehensible. "Where? With who?" "To Finland. Alone." The words felt powerful, declarative. There was a long pause. "Finland," he repeated finally. "You've never mentioned wanting to go there." "I have, actually. Several times over the years." The fact that he didn't remember these conversations was telling, another small confirmation of patterns I was only now recognizing. "I'm going to see the Northern Lights, from one of those glass igloos." "Sounds cold," he said automatically, then caught himself. "But beautiful. I'm sure it will be beautiful." Another pause stretched between us. I could almost hear him struggling to find the right response, to navigate this new version of his wife making decisions without consulting him. "Is this part of you deciding about us?" he finally asked. "About whether there still is an us?" "It's part of me deciding about me," I replied truthfully. "The rest will follow one way or another." After we hung up, I felt a curious mix of emotions. Guilt for asserting my independence so clearly, pride for the same reason, uncertainty about what waited on the other side of this journey. But beneath it all was a growing sense of rightness, as if I were finally aligning with some essential truth about myself that had been muted for decades. That night, I dreamed of Margaret. We were walking on that same beach, but now she was young, about the age she would have been when William left her. She turned to me with a radiant smile and said, "Now you understand." In the dream, I nodded. though what exactly I understood remained just beyond conscious grasp. I woke before dawn, the dream still vivid. On impulse, I threw on a robe and drove to the small local beach where we sometimes took the grandchildren in summer. The October morning was crisp, the sand cold beneath my bare feet as I walked along the deserted shore. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries mingling with the rhythm of the waves. "I think I do understand now," I said aloud, as if Margaret might hear me across the divide between living and dead. "You knew isolation could be both wound and medicine. You knew I'd need to stand alone to see clearly." The rising sun painted the water with gold and rose. I had watched countless sunrises in my life, but this one felt different, witnessed not as Henry's wife or someone's mother, but simply as Catherine, a woman on the cusp of a new chapter she was writing herself. As I turned to leave, I noticed something half buried in the sand. A perfect sand dollar, bleached white and unbroken despite the tumbling surf. I brushed it clean and slipped it into my pocket, a talisman from this moment of transition. The journey ahead would not be simple. There were conversations yet to have with Henry, boundaries to establish with well-meaning friends who pushed for quick reconciliation, and my own conflicting emotions to navigate. But for perhaps the first time since he'd walked out, I felt a sense of gratitude mingled with the pain. Gratitude for this unexpected opportunity to discover who Catherine might become when not defined by her relationships to others. The sand dollar sat on my windowsill now, catching morning light, a reminder that some things emerge from turbulent waters not just intact, but somehow more beautiful for having weathered the journey. The weeks leading up to my Finland trip became a gentle unfolding of the woman I had always been beneath the layers of wife, mother, and grandmother. I began taking a watercolor class at the community center on Tuesday mornings, something I'd expressed interest in years ago, but had abandoned when Henry pointed out it conflicted with his golf league's breakfast. "You'd be rushing to get home and make lunch for me," he'd said reasonably. At the time, I'd nodded and put away the course catalog without a second thought. Now, at 67, I stood before an easel for the first time since college, tentatively, mixing blue and yellow to create the precise shade of green I remembered from the meadow behind my childhood home. My first attempts were clumsy, more water than color, the paper buckling with my hesitation. But by the third class, something shifted. My hand grew more confident, my eye more discerning. I painted not what I thought a meadow should look like, but what that particular meadow had meant to me, a place of solitary wonder, of clouds racing shadows across tall grass, of possibilities stretching beyond the horizon. "You have a natural sense of light," my instructor commented during our 5th session. "Your paintings feel like memories rather than just scenes." I smiled, accepting the compliment without deflection, another small change. For decades, I'd minimized praise with reflexive self-deprecation. "Oh, it's nothing special. Anyone could do it. I just got lucky." The habit had formed so early in my marriage that I'd stopped noticing it, this constant diminishment of my capabilities to maintain Henry's sense of superiority. Not that he had demanded this. The adjustment had been almost unconscious, a marital choreography I'd internalized until it became invisibly automatic. At home, I began claiming physical space differently. I moved my grandmother's writing desk from the guest room to the prime spot in the living room beside the bay window. Henry had always insisted the space should remain open for traffic flow, though the room was rarely occupied by more than the two of us. Now I sat at that graceful cherry desk each morning, journaling as dawn light filtered through the east-facing windows, casting prism rainbows across my pages. My journaling practice evolved from documenting grief into exploring curiosity. Rather than fixating on why Henry had left or whether I could forgive him, I began asking different questions. What brings me joy when no one is watching? What conversation would I have with my 20-year-old self? What would courage look like today? This shifting focus manifested in unexpected ways. I registered for a cooking class specializing in Thai cuisine. Spicy, complex flavors Henry had always claimed upset his digestion. I joined a local hiking group that met at dawn on Saturdays, discovering muscles long dormant and vistas I'd lived near but never appreciated. I reconnected with Elaine, my college roommate who had drifted to the periphery of my life after Henry mentioned finding her a bit much following our wedding. Elaine, now a retired professor living in Oregon, laughed with delight at my impending solo adventure to Finland. "Catherine Harper coming out of hibernation," she exclaimed during our video call. "I always knew you had more adventure in you than that suburban life allowed." I bristled slightly at her characterization of my choices. "I loved being a mother," I said. "Creating a stable home for my family was meaningful work." "Of course it was," Elaine softened. "But it wasn't the sum total of who you are. Remember our backpacking trip through the Adirondacks? How you insisted on climbing that extra peak even though we were exhausted? Or the time you organized that midnight protest when the administration tried to cut the women's literature program? That fire didn't vanish. It just got banked for a while." Her words resonated through the following days. Not a rejection of the life I'd built, but a recognition that parts of myself had indeed been set aside. Not just because of Henry's departure, but long before, through countless small surrenders I'd made in service to harmony and stability. Margaret's emerald ring remained on my finger like a talisman, its weight a constant reminder of her presence in my journey. I found myself talking to her in quiet moments, not expecting answers, but feeling a connection that transcended her physical absence. "Did you bank your fire too, Margaret?" I asked one evening, polishing the emerald's facets with a soft cloth. "Is that why you orchestrated all this? The account, the ring, the voucher? Were you trying to give me what you never allowed yourself?" The week before my scheduled departure for Finland, an unexpected visitor arrived at my door. Alice, Henry's younger sister, stood on my porch with a tight smile and a small gift bag in her hands. We had never been close. Her personality too similar to Henry's for us to find easy connection, both of them intellectual and somewhat reserved compared to my more expressive nature. "I heard you're traveling soon," she said by way of greeting. "May I come in?" I led her to the living room, noting her quick inventory of the changes I'd made. The rearranged furniture, my grandmother's desk, the vibrant new throw pillows, the conspicuous absence of family photos featuring Henry alone. "Coffee?" I offered. "Please." She settled onto the edge of the sofa, gift bag perched on her knees. "Henry mentioned you're going to Finland." Of course he had. The siblings had always been close, their Sunday phone calls a ritual through decades of adulthood. I had sometimes envied their easy rapport, so different from my own complicated relationship with my brother in California. "Yes," I confirmed, returning with 2 steaming mugs. "I leave next week." "Alone?" The question carried a hint of judgment. "Yes, alone." I kept my tone neutral but firm. "It's something I've always wanted to do." Alice nodded, her gaze dropping to my hands. As I set down her coffee, her eyes widened at the sight of Margaret's emerald. "Mom's ring," she said quietly. I wondered where that had gone. I resisted the urge to cover the ring or apologize for having it. Margaret left it for me in a safe deposit box, along with some other things. A complex emotion passed across Alice's features: surprise, confusion, perhaps a flicker of hurt. I always assumed I would inherit that ring. "I think Margaret had her reasons for the choice she made," I said gently. Alice sipped her coffee in silence for a moment, visibly processing this revelation. Finally, she reached for the gift bag in her lap. "I brought you something," she said, "for your trip." Inside was a hand-bound journal, its leather cover tooled, with a delicate pattern of intertwined vines and small flowers. A silver pen nestled beside it. "It was Mother's," Alice explained. from her trip to Europe after college, before she met Dad. I found it when I was going through some old boxes. Last month, I opened the journal carefully. Margaret's youthful handwriting filled the first few pages, observations about Paris in 1957, sketches of architectural details, pressed flowers from Luxembourg gardens. Then, abruptly, the entries stopped, the remaining pages blank. She never finished it, I murmured, running my fingers over the last entry, a half-completed description of a cathedral's stained glass windows. No, Alice confirmed. She met Dad in London the next week, cut her solo trip short, and came home to get married 6 months later. She gestured to the journal. I thought maybe you could finish it, or at least continue the spirit of it. The gift was unexpected and touched me deeply. Thank you, Alice. This is incredibly meaningful. She nodded, a hint of warmth softening her normally reserved expression. Henry told me about Mother's letters, about the Harrington curse, as she called it. Her mouth twisted in a wry smile. I always wondered why she was so insistent that I maintain my own career after marriage, that I keep a separate bank account, that I preserve some independence even within partnership. Did she ever mention William leaving her? I asked. Never, not once. Alice looked genuinely shocked. 43 years of marriage, and I never knew there had been a separation. They protected you from it, I said. Just as we've tried to shield our children from the raw truth of what's happened between Henry and me. Alice studied me with new interest. You're different, she observed. Since Henry left. Not diminished as I expected, but expanded. Somehow. Her perception was surprisingly accurate. I am different, I acknowledged. Not because Henry left, but because his leaving created space for questions I needed to ask myself. Questions I might never have confronted otherwise. About whether to take him back? That's one question, I agreed. But there are many others that feel more pressing at the moment. We talked for nearly 2 hours, the longest, most honest conversation we'd ever shared. Alice spoke about her own marriage, about patterns she recognized from our discussion, of the Harrington curse, about her decision to maintain professional identity even while raising children. I shared insights from my ongoing journey of rediscovery, careful not to frame it as either a rejection of my past choices or a simplistic finding myself narrative. As she prepared to leave, Alice paused at the door. Henry misses you terribly, she said. He's doing the work, therapy, reflection, confronting his patterns. But he's terrified you'll decide you prefer life without him. I appreciated her directness. I don't know what I'll decide, I replied honestly, but I know I needed this time to stand on my own, to remember who Catherine is when she's not defined primarily as someone's wife. Alice surprised me with a brief, awkward hug. Safe travels, she said. I hope you find whatever you're looking for in those glass igloos. That night, I packed Margaret's journal in my suitcase, running my fingers over its worn leather cover. I would continue where she had stopped, documenting my own journey through unknown territories, both geographical and emotional. The symmetry felt right somehow, a conversation across generations of women reclaiming pieces of themselves. The morning of my departure dawned clear and bracingly cold. November had settled over our small town with crystalline beauty, frost etching intricate patterns on windows and bare tree branches. I had arranged for a car service to take me to the airport, declining offers from my children to drive me. This journey would begin as it would continue, independently. As I placed my suitcase by the front door, a text message arrived from Henry. Safe travels. I'll be here when you return, whatever you decide. His words carried no pressure, no expectation, just a simple statement of commitment without demand. A small acknowledgement of my autonomy that would have been unthinkable months earlier. The car arrived precisely on time, the driver professionally cheerful as he loaded my luggage. As we pulled away from the house, I resisted the urge to look back. Forward was the only direction that mattered now. Helsinki welcomed me with elegant simplicity, clean lines, efficient systems, and a quality of light unlike anything I'd experienced before. The winter sun hung low on the horizon even at midday, casting long shadows and a golden glow that transformed ordinary streets into paintings. I spent 2 days there, acclimatizing to both the time change and my new reality as a solo traveler. At first, I felt self-conscious dining alone, imagining pitying glances from other patrons, but I soon realized this was projection rather than reality. No one stared, no one whispered. The Finns, I quickly learned, respected personal space and independence in ways American culture often didn't. A woman dining alone was neither tragic nor remarkable, just another person enjoying a meal. This revelation was oddly freeing. I began to savor these solo dinners, bringing Margaret's journal to record observations, not just about places, but about my internal landscape. One entry from my second night captured this shifting perspective. I've spent decades considering how my choices might affect others, what Henry would think, what the children might need, how friends or extended family might judge. Even my interior monologue included others' imagined responses. But here, unknown and unremarkable, I'm learning to hear my own voice without that constant chorus. What do I think about this museum? How does this food taste to me? What would I like to do next? Simple questions with surprisingly complex answers, when they're free from the habit of accommodation. From Helsinki, I traveled north by train to Rovaniemi, watching the landscape transform from urban sophistication to pristine wilderness. Forests of pine and birch, weighed down with snow, stretched to the horizon. Occasionally, small red cottages appeared like fairy tale illustrations against the white expanse, thin streams of smoke rising from chimneys into the impossibly blue sky. The glass igloo resort was even more magical than the brochures had suggested. Each dome stood separate from the others, offering privacy while maintaining a delicate connection to the landscape. Inside, my accommodation was surprisingly spacious. A comfortable bed positioned perfectly beneath the glass ceiling, a small but elegant bathroom, and a sitting area with heated floors and panoramic views. "You have chosen perfect timing," the receptionist told me during check-in, her accent musical. "The forecast shows high aurora activity for tonight. Very good chance for the lights." I spent the afternoon exploring the resort's grounds, following carefully maintained paths through snow-laden forests. The silence was profound, not the absence of sound, but a presence of its own, broken only by the crunch of snow beneath my boots and the occasional distant call of a bird. The temperature hovered around -15 Celsius, but my borrowed Arctic gear kept me surprisingly comfortable. As darkness fell, early, barely past 3 in the afternoon, I returned to my igloo. The resort had prepared it perfectly for evening viewing, with the interior lights dimmed and the heating adjusted to prevent condensation on the glass dome. I arranged pillows at the head of the bed and lay back, eyes trained on the star-filled sky above. The waiting became a meditation of sorts. I thought about Henry, about our children, about the patterns in my life that had led to this moment of solitary wonder. But these thoughts weren't tinged with the sadness or anger that had colored them in recent months. They simply existed, acknowledged, but not dominating. Margaret's journal rested on the nightstand beside me. I had been adding entries each day, continuing her documentation of a woman's journey through unfamiliar territory. In a strange way, I felt her presence more strongly here, thousands of miles from home, than I had even while holding her emerald ring or reading her posthumous letters. "I understand now why you wanted this for me," I whispered into the silence. "Not just financial protection or practical independence, but this experience of meeting myself anew." The northern lights began subtly, a faint greenish glow on the horizon that might have been dismissed as light pollution if I hadn't been watching so intently. Gradually, the glow intensified, expanding upward in delicate tendrils that shifted and pulsed like living things. Green deepened to emerald, then began to dance with ribbons of purple and the occasional flash of crimson. I gasped as the display expanded across the entire visible sky, waves of color washing over the stars. The scientific explanation, solar, particles colliding with atmospheric gases, seemed woefully inadequate for the magic unfolding above me. This was alchemy, poetry, a cosmic ballet choreographed for no audience and every audience simultaneously. Tears streamed down my face, but I made no move to wipe them away. They weren't tears of sadness or even overwhelming beauty, though the aurora was certainly beautiful beyond description. They were tears of recognition, of seeing something true and essential that had always been there, waiting to be acknowledged. I must have fallen asleep sometime after midnight, the aurora still dancing across the sky. My dreams were vivid, saturated with color and movement. Margaret appeared, not as the elegant older woman I had known, but as a young woman about the age she would have been during her abbreviated European journey. She wore hiking boots and carried a backpack, her hair loose around her shoulders. "You made it," Dream Margaret said, gesturing to the light still pulsing overhead. "I did," I replied, though I'm not entirely sure where here is beyond the geographical location. She laughed, the sound lighter than I remembered. "You're at the intersection of who you were and who you're becoming, the in-between place where choices crystallize." "What choice did you make?" I asked. "After William returned?" Her expression grew thoughtful. "I chose security over discovery. It wasn't wrong exactly. It gave me Henry and Alice, and eventually you and the grandchildren, but it was incomplete." "And what should I choose?" Dream Margaret shook her head. "That's not how this works. I can open doors, but I can't tell you which threshold to cross." I woke with these words echoing in my mind, the weak Arctic sun already setting again, though it was barely past noon. I reached for Margaret's journal and recorded the dream while it was still vivid, adding my own reflections. The question isn't whether to take Henry back. It's whether the woman I'm becoming can create something new with the man he's trying to become. Not a return to our old patterns, but a completely different relationship built on mutual growth rather than my accommodation. The next 10 days passed in a rhythm entirely my own. I joined guided excursions to nearby national parks, tried cross-country skiing, discovering muscles I didn't know existed, and spent one memorable afternoon learning to cook traditional Sami dishes from a local grandmother whose English was as limited as my Finnish, resulting in a cooking lesson conducted primarily through gesture, laughter, and the universal language of food appreciation. Each night I returned to my igloo, sometimes to another aurora display, sometimes to a sky so dense with stars it seemed impossible they didn't crash into each other. I wrote in Margaret's journal daily, filling pages with observations, questions, realizations, and increasingly plans for the life awaiting me back home. On my final evening, I received an unexpected email from Henry. We had maintained minimal contact during my trip. Just a brief message confirming my safe arrival, and another, acknowledging his receipt of a few photos I'd sent to our family group chat. This message was different. "Kathy," it began, "I've been doing a lot of thinking while you've been away. Not just about us, but about who I've been for decades and who I want to be going forward. My therapist suggested I write you a letter expressing these thoughts, but asked that I not send it until I was sure it came from genuine insight rather than desperation to reclaim what I carelessly discarded. I've written and rewritten this more times than I can count. The truth is simpler than all my drafts. I left because I was terrified of aging and death, and foolishly thought I could outrun these fears by abandoning the life that reminded me of time's passage. I believed I needed freedom from commitment to find myself, when what I really needed was courage to face my mortality within the context of a meaningful life. I don't expect these realizations to automatically earn your forgiveness or trust. Those must be rebuilt slowly, if you're even willing to try. What I want you to know is that I'm doing the work to understand my patterns, to develop tools for managing existential anxiety without destructive behaviors, and to become someone worthy of connection, whether that's eventually with you or not. Mom was right about the Harrington curse. I've been researching our family history and found evidence of this pattern going back 4 generations. But acknowledging a pattern isn't the same as being doomed to repeat it. I'm determined to break this cycle, even if it's too late for us. The house feels empty without you, not just physically, but spiritually. I've noticed how much your presence animated our home, how your touches, flowers on the table, music in the evenings, the scent of something baking, created an atmosphere I took for granted. I find myself talking to you throughout the day, imagining conversations we might have about small observations or questions. But I'm also learning to sit with emptiness, to resist the urge to fill uncomfortable spaces with noise or distraction. There's a clarity that comes from this practice that I've never experienced before. Whatever you decide upon your return, please know that I honor your journey and respect your autonomy. The man who left you 4 months ago couldn't have written those words sincerely. The man writing to you now means them with his whole heart. With love and profound regret for the pain I've caused, Henry. I read the message twice, searching for the familiar patterns of Henry's previous attempts at reconciliation, the subtle guilt trips, the implications that I was somehow complicit in his departure, the focus on his feelings rather than the impact of his actions. But this communication felt different, grounded in genuine reflection rather than emotional reaction. Setting the phone aside, I stepped outside my igloo into the crystalline Arctic night. The aurora was performing again, green and purple waves rippling across the velvet sky. The cold was intense, breath-forming instant clouds that hung momentarily, before dissipating. I stood mesmerized, not just by the celestial display, but by the clarity of the moment. I didn't need to decide anything tonight. The questions that had haunted me for months: would I take Henry back? Could I trust him again? What did I want for the next chapter of my life? Were still present, but they no longer carried the same anxious urgency. They were important questions deserving thoughtful answers, but they didn't define my worth or determine my happiness. Margaret had given me an incredible gift with her posthumous interventions, not just financial security, or an emerald ring or this magnificent journey, but the opportunity to discover that I was whole on my own. Whatever decision I made about Henry would come from that wholeness, not from fear of solitude or financial dependence or concern about others' judgments. I returned to my igloo and opened Margaret's journal one final time during this journey. On the last page, I wrote, "The northern lights aren't actually answers written across the sky, though they feel that way sometimes. They're simply a beautiful phenomenon that exists whether we witness them or not. Our observation doesn't create them, but it does create meaning. Perhaps that's true of life's passages as well. They happen regardless, but the meaning we assign to them transforms bare experience into wisdom. Thank you, Margaret, for seeing what I needed before I could recognize it myself. I'm bringing home a woman you might recognize from long ago, one who stands firmly in her own center rather than orbiting others. Whether Henry and I create something, new together or part permanently, that centered self will remain. The journey continues. The story isn't finished, but for perhaps the first time, I'm writing it consciously, rather than allowing it to be written for me. I closed the journal and packed it carefully for the journey home, knowing that whatever waited there, I was returning as a woman transformed, not by abandonment, but by the courage to face the unknown, both within and beyond myself. The plane descended through clouds thick as wool, the landscape of home gradually emerging below, familiar, yet somehow changed, like a photograph viewed through a different lens. Or perhaps it wasn't the landscape that had transformed during my absence, but my perspective on it. 2 weeks in Finland had altered something fundamental in how I perceived the world and my place within it. As passengers around me rushed to grab luggage and queue for the exit, I remained seated, mentally preparing for the transition. From Catherine the solo traveler, confident, adventurous, self-sufficient, to Catherine returning to a complex web of relationships and unresolved questions. The woman who had gazed in wonder at the northern lights would not disappear. She would walk beside me into whatever came next. My daughter Jennifer waited at the arrival gate, her smile widening as I emerged. At 42, she was so clearly a blend of Henry and me, his analytical mind paired with my expressive warmth, his height with my auburn hair, now threaded with silver like mine. "Mom?" She embraced me tightly. "You look different." "Good." "Different." "I feel different," I admitted, linking arms as we walked toward baggage claim. "More myself, somehow." Jennifer studied me with curious eyes. "The northern lights must be powerful medicine." "They are," I agreed. "But so is solitude, and choice, and remembering parts of yourself set aside for too long." My suitcase appeared on the carousel, and I moved to retrieve it, but Jennifer gently intercepted. "Let me, Mom. You must be exhausted." I smiled but shook my head. "I've got it, sweetheart. I've been managing just fine on my own." A flash of surprise crossed her features, quickly replaced by understanding. This was not rejection of her care, but assertion of my capability, a subtle but significant distinction. Throughout my marriage, I had often yielded to assistance I didn't actually need, reinforcing others' perception of me as somehow fragile or dependent. Small moments like this would help recalibrate those perceptions, both external and internal. The drive home through familiar streets felt dreamlike after the alien beauty of the Arctic. Christmas decorations had appeared during my absence, twinkling, lights and evergreen wreaths transforming the town square. Jennifer provided casual updates about family matters: Amanda's promotion, Michael's son making the basketball team, her own children's approaching school holiday concert. "And Dad?" I finally asked, my voice steady. "How is he?" Jennifer's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "He's different too, quieter, more reflective. He's been seeing Dr. Matthews twice a week." Dr. Matthews was a respected therapist specializing in life transitions and relationship issues. I had suggested her myself years ago when Henry struggled with retirement adjustment, a recommendation he had dismissed as unnecessary at the time. "He's been meeting with us kids individually," Jennifer continued, "having real conversations, not just about you or the separation, but about his whole life. Things I never knew about his childhood, about Grandma and Grandpa's marriage." She glanced at me quickly. "Did you know Grandpa William left Grandma once?" "I know now," I replied. "Margaret left me a letter explaining it. Dad told us everything, about the Harrington curse, as Grandma called it, about how he's trying to break the pattern." Jennifer hesitated. "He's really doing the work, Mom. I've never seen him so vulnerable." I nodded, absorbing this information without immediately responding. Henry's efforts mattered, but they didn't automatically dictate my path forward. That understanding itself represented growth, the recognition that I could acknowledge his journey while prioritizing my own. My house, still our house legally, though now functionally mine, appeared around the bend, its familiar silhouette outlined against the late afternoon sky. The Japanese maple Henry had so carefully tended stood bare in the front yard, its delicate branches etched like calligraphy against the winter landscape. "Dad asked if he could come by tomorrow," Jennifer said as she pulled into the driveway. "Just to talk," he said. "I told him I'd ask you." I considered this request, searching for any reflexive tension or anxiety. Finding none, I nodded. "That would be fine. Afternoon would be better. I'll need the morning to readjust and unpack." Inside, the house welcomed me with the stillness of uninhabited space. Not unloved, but paused, like a held breath. Jennifer had clearly prepared for my return. Fresh flowers brightened the kitchen table, and the subtle scent of lemon polish hung in the air. The thermostat had been adjusted to my preferred temperature, the mail sorted into neat stacks on my grandmother's desk. "I stocked the refrigerator with basics," she explained, carrying my suitcase upstairs despite my protests. "Nothing elaborate, just milk, eggs, bread. Oh, and I picked up that cranberry orange tea you like." This thoughtfulness nearly brought tears to my eyes. My daughter's attentiveness not just to practical needs, but to the small comforts that constituted care. "Thank you, sweetheart, for everything." After Jennifer departed with promises to call tomorrow, I moved through the rooms slowly, reacquainting myself with this space that had sheltered 40 years of marriage. The house felt both intimately familiar and strangely new, as if my absence had reset some invisible energy within its walls. I unpacked methodically, laundry sorted into appropriate baskets, souvenirs arranged on the bed for proper distribution later. Margaret's journal I placed on my nightstand, its worn leather cover a testament to journeys both completed and ongoing. The emerald ring caught the last rays of sunset as I twisted it gently on my finger, a wordless communion with the woman who had orchestrated this transformation from beyond the grave. Sleep came easily that night, deep and dreamless, my body grateful for a familiar bed after weeks of travel. I woke to weak winter sunlight filtering through curtains I had sewn myself nearly 15 years ago. The pattern of blue hydrangeas now gently faded, but still lovely. Time passing, beauty enduring though, changed. Perhaps a metaphor for whatever might come next in my relationship with Henry. Morning unfolded at my own pace, a luxury I had rediscovered during my solo journey. Coffee savored rather than gulped, breakfast mindfully prepared and eaten without multitasking, a long shower with lavender-scented products I'd purchased in Helsinki. By 10 o'clock, I felt fully present in my home and myself, ready for the conversation awaiting me that afternoon. Henry arrived precisely at 2, punctual as always. I observed him through the front window as he approached the door, his familiar gait slightly more hesitant, his shoulders carrying a new tension. He had lost weight, perhaps 15 pounds from his frame that had never carried extra before. His silver hair, always neatly trimmed during our marriage, had grown slightly longer, softening the angles of his face. I opened the door before he could knock, our eyes meeting directly for the first time in nearly 5 months. The moment stretched between us, weighted with everything unsaid. "Catherine," he finally spoke, my full name rather than the diminutive Kathy he had always used. This small recognition of my complete identity did not go unnoticed. "Henry," I replied, stepping back to allow him entry. "Please come in." He paused on the threshold, almost tentatively, as if awaiting further permission. The Henry who had left would have strode in confidently, claiming space as rightfully his. This hesitation represented a fundamental shift in his understanding of our dynamic. "The house looks different," he observed as I led him to the living room. His gaze took in the rearranged furniture, the new artwork on the walls, watercolors from my class now professionally framed, and my grandmother's desk positioned prominently by the window. "It is different," I acknowledged. "As am I." We sat across from each other, me in my favorite reading chair, him perched at the edge of the sofa where we had once spent countless evenings side by side. "Would you like tea?" I offered, social, conditioning briefly overtaking my determination not to slip immediately into caretaking mode. "No, thank you." He rested his hands on his knees, fingers slightly splayed as if bracing himself. "How was Finland?" "Transformative," I replied simply. The northern lights were even more magnificent than I'd imagined. But the greater revelation was rediscovering parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. He nodded slowly. "You look luminous, at peace. I am, I confirmed, though it's a hard-won peace. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, but contemplative, each of us weighing what to say next, how much to reveal. I've been doing a lot of work, Henry finally continued. Therapy twice weekly. A men's group focused on emotional intelligence. Reading about attachment patterns and midlife transitions. He met my eyes directly. Learning how deeply I hurt you, and why I was capable of such cruelty, disguised as self-discovery. In our 40 years together, I had never heard Henry speak with such raw honesty about his emotional landscape. The man I married had prided himself on rationality, viewing feelings as suspect data at best, manipulative weapons at worst. "What have you discovered?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than testing him. He drew a deep breath. That what I thought was a sudden crisis was actually a pattern established in childhood. My father's emotional absence, punctuated by his actual physical abandonment that I never knew about, taught me that love is fundamentally unreliable. I developed strategies to protect myself: emotional detachment, intellectual focus, achievement orientation. He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. These worked well enough until retirement removed my primary identity as provider and professional. Facing mortality without those buffers triggered panic I mistook for restlessness. His voice grew quieter. I convinced myself I needed freedom from commitment, when what I really feared was meaninglessness in the face of death. The insight surprised me with its depth. This was not superficial self-help language, but genuine, psychological excavation. That's a profound realization, I acknowledged, and a painful one, I imagine. Excruciating, he confirmed with a sad smile. But necessary. Dr. Matthews doesn't believe in comfortable therapy. Another silence stretched between us, this one lighter somehow, as if a long-carried weight had been partially set down. I don't expect these realizations to automatically repair what I broke, Henry continued carefully. Trust requires more than understanding. It requires consistent action over time. I know that. I nodded, appreciating his recognition of this fundamental truth. Yes, it does. I'd like the opportunity to demonstrate that consistency, he said, leaning forward slightly. Not by moving back in or resuming our former relationship as if nothing happened, but perhaps by beginning something new, getting to know each other again as the people we are now, not who we were 40 years ago or even 6 months ago. The proposition was unexpected in its humility and wisdom, not a plea for restoration, but an invitation to exploration. I considered it carefully, aware that my response would set the tone for whatever came next. I'd be open to that, I said. Finally. With clear boundaries and no predetermined outcome. A genuine discovery process rather than a reconciliation project. Relief washed across his features, followed quickly by solemn acknowledgement. That's more than I deserve, and everything I hoped for. It's not about deserving, Henry. It's about choosing, consciously, deliberately, with eyes wide open. We talked for nearly 3 hours, covering territory both practical and profound. How this exploration might look logistically. Weekly. Dinners, perhaps, in neutral locations rather than our home. Attendance together at a couples therapy session, not to fix our marriage, but to establish healthy communication patterns for whatever relationship might emerge. A mutual agreement to maintain separate residences for at least 6 months, regardless of progress. Throughout the conversation, I observed a fundamental shift in our dynamic. Where once I would have accommodated, now I stated needs directly. Where once Henry would have subtly directed, now he genuinely listened. We were no longer performing the unconscious choreography of a long-term marriage, but engaged in true dialogue between autonomous individuals. As evening approached, Henry gathered his coat to leave. At the door, he paused, his expression earnest. "I want to thank you, Catherine." For what? For this chance, of course. But more importantly, for showing me what courage looks like. Walking away was cowardice disguised as bravery. What you've done, facing abandonment, rebuilding yourself, opening to possibility without guarantees, that's true courage. His words touched me deeply. Not because I needed his validation, but because they reflected genuine growth on his part. The capacity to recognize strength in vulnerability, to value emotional resilience as highly as he had once prized intellectual achievement. "Thank you for seeing that," I replied simply. After he left, I prepared a light dinner and ate on the porch despite the December chill, wrapped in a thick blanket as I watched darkness settle over the neighborhood. Stars emerged in the clear sky, not as dramatic as the Arctic constellations, but beautiful in their familiar patterns. My phone buzzed with texts from all three children, their curiosity about the meeting with their father barely disguised as casual check-ins. I responded with gentle deflection, promising details when I had processed the conversation more fully. Their protective instincts touched me, but I needed space to form my own impressions without their well-meaning influence. Over the following weeks, Henry and I began our careful exploration of whatever might be possible between us now. We met for coffee at a small cafe downtown, neutral territory where neither of us could slip into established patterns. We attended a gallery opening featuring my watercolor instructor's work, discussing the paintings as equals rather than with Henry's former tendency to lecture on artistic techniques he'd read about but never practiced. Each encounter revealed layers to Henry I had never fully seen during our marriage: vulnerability beneath his intellectual facade, curiosity where there had been certainty, willingness to sit with uncomfortable emotions rather than intellectualizing them away. Similarly, each meeting allowed me to practice the self-sovereignty I had discovered in Finland, stating preferences directly, disagreeing without apology, claiming space without shrinking. Christmas approached with its complicated emotions and family expectations. Our children pushed for traditional gatherings, struggling to navigate the ambiguity of our current relationship. "But where will Dad be for Christmas morning?" Michael asked during a phone call, frustration evident in his voice. "We've always done presents and breakfast at your house." "This year will be different," I explained gently but firmly. "Your father and I are spending Christmas Eve separately. He'll join us for lunch on Christmas Day, and we'll open family gifts then." "But—" "Michael," I interrupted with newfound directness. "I understand this is difficult for everyone. But your father and I are finding our way forward thoughtfully and deliberately. That requires space for both of us to process individually, not just together. We're not excluding him from family celebrations, but we're also not pretending nothing has changed." My son's silence spoke volumes about his discomfort with this new maternal assertiveness. Like his sisters, Michael had unconsciously benefited from my tendency to smooth rough edges and accommodate others' preferences at the expense of my own. His adjustment to this more self-possessed mother would take time. "Okay," he finally conceded. "But will you at least make the cinnamon rolls? It's not Christmas without them." I smiled at this small victory, acceptance of the new boundary, even if reluctant. "Yes, I'll make the cinnamon rolls." Christmas Eve found me attending the candlelight service at our church alone for the first time in decades. The experience was poignant, but surprisingly peaceful. I sang the familiar carols, their ancient words of hope and rebirth resonating differently this year. Light emerging from darkness, new life from apparent endings, timeless truths suddenly personally relevant. Afterward, I declined invitations to join friends for late dinners or nightcaps, choosing instead to return home for quiet reflection. I built a small fire in the fireplace, poured a glass of good wine, and settled into my reading chair with Margaret's journal. I had been adding entries regularly since returning from Finland, documenting this strange new chapter with the same thoughtfulness I had applied to my Arctic adventures. Tonight I wrote honestly about the complex emotions swirling as the year drew to a close. gratitude for Margaret's foresight, tenderness toward Henry's genuine efforts, pride in my own resilience, and lingering uncertainty about the future. The question isn't whether I could forgive him, I wrote, but whether we can create something worthy of a new commitment. Not restoration, but genuine transformation. For both of us. Christmas Day unfolded with surprising grace. My children and their families arrived mid-morning, filling the house with the cheerful chaos of grandchildren, wrapping paper and competing conversations. Henry joined us at noon, bearing thoughtfully chosen gifts and a homemade apple pie, his first attempt at baking, he admitted with shy pride. The awkwardness I had anticipated never fully materialized. Perhaps because both Henry and I had abandoned pretense, we were not performing reconciliation for our family's comfort, but navigating genuine connection with authenticity. The grandchildren responded to this honesty with their characteristic resilience, accepting without question that Grandpa now lived in an apartment but was still Grandpa. After dinner, while the younger adults tackled dishes and the grandchildren explored new toys, Henry and I found ourselves momentarily alone in the living room, seated before the Christmas tree with its collection of 40 years' worth of ornaments. "Thank you for today," he said quietly, "for including me, for making space." "This is still your family too," I replied. "That hasn't changed, regardless of what happens between us." He nodded, his gaze fixed on a particular ornament, a small glass globe containing a pressed flower from our honeymoon. "I've been thinking about something you said in our first conversation after you returned from Finland, about how we might create something new rather than trying to restore what was. Yes? I've realized that what we had before wasn't." He paused, searching for the right words. "It wasn't equal. It was comfortable for me because you constantly adjusted to maintain harmony, even at the cost of your own voice." The assessment was startlingly accurate. "Yes, that's true." "I don't want that again," he said, surprising me. "Even if it means more conflict, more negotiation. I want to truly see you, to make space for all of you, not just the parts that accommodate me." Tears pricked behind my eyes, not from sadness, but recognition. This was perhaps the most profound gift he could offer. The acknowledgement of my full selfhood, the value of my voice even when it didn't echo his. "That's what I want too," I said softly. "Not just from you, but from myself. To maintain this clarity and courage regardless of whether we rebuild together or apart." He reached for my hand, tentatively, giving me every opportunity to withdraw. I allowed the contact, our fingers interlacing with familiar contours yet new intention. "I love you, Catherine," he said simply. "Not the version of you that existed to support me, but all of you, including the parts I'm just beginning to truly see." "I believe you," I replied, the words carefully chosen. Not, "I love you too," though perhaps I did, but acknowledgement of his sincerity, his growth. It was enough for now, a foundation for whatever might come next. That evening, after everyone had departed and the house settled into quiet, I returned to Margaret's journal one final time before the new year. On the last page, I wrote, "Margaret, you orchestrated this journey with remarkable prescience, not just the practical provisions, but the spiritual preparation. You couldn't have known exactly how events would unfold, but you understood the essential patterns at work. The account gave me freedom to choose from strength rather than necessity. The ring connected me to a lineage of women who survived difficult passages. The trip to Finland provided space to remember myself apart from relational identities. The crisis you anticipated became a crucible for transformation, not just for me, but perhaps for Henry too. Whether we forge a new relationship together or continue on separate paths, the growth is real and valuable. You broke the pattern of silence that had preserved the Harrington curse for generations, giving us the chance to consciously confront what had been unconsciously transmitted. Tomorrow begins a new year, the first I will enter with complete clarity about my own worth and capability. Whatever choices await, I make them now from wholeness rather than fear, from possibility rather than obligation. This is your true legacy to me, far more precious than financial security or family heirlooms. The Northern Lights taught me that the most beautiful phenomena are both ephemeral and eternal, constantly changing, yet somehow timeless. Perhaps that's true of love as well. Not a static achievement to be preserved at all costs, but a dynamic journey of continuous revelation, requiring courage to release old forms so new ones may emerge. Thank you for seeing what I needed before I could recognize it myself. The journey continues. The story unfolds. But now, at last, I am fully present to write it consciously, with my own hand, in my own voice. I close the journal gently, running my fingers over its worn leather cover. Outside, snow had begun to fall, soft, silent flakes transforming the familiar landscape into something new and beautiful, like my life, like my heart, like the unexpected journey still unfolding, one conscious choice at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.